You're listening to Cooper Talk.
Welcome to Cooper Talk. I'm your host, Steve Cooper, and remember, I'm only as hip as my guest. I'm going to tell you something, people. Joanne and myself were filling out our application for our wedding license, or whatever it's called, wedding certificate. And it was funny because, now we live in New Jersey, so it should be basic, straight up. It says, my parents' name, her parents' name. I had to give the first name and last name of my ex-wife and when we were divorced. But then it actually asked that the two of us were related. Okay, now what I understand is we live in New Jersey. Cousins aren't marrying cousins. We just laughed, and I'm thinking when we go down to get the actual license, we should answer the question yes, just to see how they react. Anyway, we have a great show today. My guest is I don't know if we call him, he can might clear it up if we're fellow New Jerseyans or New Jerseyites. He was also in a band that I loved, who sang one of my favorite songs. And I used to listen to him when I lived in L.A., and I always wanted to go to the place where he was live. I believe it was in Huntington Beach. I'm doing Sunday brunch, and my guest is Chris Carter. How you doing, Chris?
Hey, Steve. How you doing?
I'm doing good. So you're a New Jersey guy. Would you say we're New Jerseyans or New Jerseyites?
Oh, gee. A Jersey question right off the top. Jerseyites, I guess I never use either of them myself, but I guess that might be, grammatically more correct.
Okay.
Jersey boys, we are.
Okay, there you go. Now, growing up in New Jersey, you started playing bass. I'm not sure at what age. What made you get into music? Was it just because music was all around New Jersey, or what was your driving force to get you into a career of music?
I don't know. I just loved it from the first time I heard. I guess I loved rock and roll more than just music per se, though I enjoy all forms of music. But yeah, I mean, it was just the typical stuff. It was my love of rock and roll, and when we were kids, I was born in 1959, so 67, 68, 69, it was all AM radio. It was before FM. And that was back when, a band like the Beatles or the Stones or Creedence or whomever would put their best songs out as singles, as time progressed, usually you didn't like the singles, you liked the album tracks. But back then, radio was just great, especially like 50 years ago in 1969, my favorite year for AM radio. Every song was good. You look at the top 40 in 1969, and it was just like Honky Tonk Woman and the Beatles, and it was just a great time. So that's what, got me into rock and roll. And then as the 70s progressed and I got to be a high school guy, I really got into British rock and roll. I was like the only kid in my high school with T-Rex and David Bowie and Mott the Hoople and Slade records. I was really into that stuff. So, yeah, I mean, it was always, it was the music, though, more than anything else. Not, I didn't collect, Beatle wigs and stuff like that. I was just all about the music.
Well, it's funny, you talk about the music, and you're right. I was born in '63. And, I remember when that Kiss album, Rock and Roll, came over, Rock and Roll, I believe, Forever, whatever it was called, came out. There was
Rock and Roll Over.
Yeah, and there was that sticker in it. And you would put the sticker on your notebook, and that meant you were cool and you were a Kiss fan.
Right. Exactly. You were in the Kiss army. I saw Kiss, believe it or not, before the first album came out. That's how I go back with Kiss.
Now, where did you see him at?
Joint in the Woods. You remember the Joint in the Woods?
I grew up near Philadelphia, so I wasn't up near you guys.
It was a place in New Jersey that was literally in the woods, and you'd park your car, and then they would take you on a horse and buggy to the club. It was nutty. That didn't last very long, but all these cool bands played there, and like the week the Kiss album came out, they were out there, and then they saw them at the Capitol Theater, I think a week after the first album came out. 1974. It was great because we kind of didn't know what to expect when we saw them, and it was like, of all the bands I ever saw, that it sounds like kid stuff now, but it really did affect me as a 13-year-old. The power of combining visuals with rock and roll. I really love that.
Now you said in high school you were drawn to the British invasion and British bands. What do you think drew you to them? Because we did have some great American bands. I mean, it's not like
we had great American. I loved Alice Cooper. I mean, I love the American bands, but there was something about the British bands, just the sound of their style that they had this little British thing going, especially if you sang like you were from England, like the Kinks and Bowie and those guys really emphasized that they were British. Different thing, and plus nobody knew about it here, and there's always a certain, fascination about liking something that everybody else, like nobody else in my high school that I hung out with, were listening to these records. They were listening to Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin and the big stuff, and I was listening to this like glam records, these glam records, and I don't know, there was just something catchy about it. I loved it. It was just, the music was great, and these guys looked really cool too. That was another thing.
Now, when did you start actually playing an instrument?
I started playing bass, I guess, 7th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade. Yeah, I played in every school I attended in a band. I played at Preakness School in Wayne in the 6th grade, and I played Schuyler Colfax in the 8th grade in Wayne as well, and then Wayne Hills High School, where I graduated in 1977. So yeah, I was always a musician. I always played in different bands.
Now, I heard when Dramarama formed, it formed at a record store that you owned. Now, how did you own a record store at a young age?
Well, I always wanted to have a record store. That was like a dream of mine. And I managed the Corvettes record department in the Willowbrook Mall in Wayne, which square footage-wise was, believe it or not, I know this sounds like a crazy statement, but it was the biggest record store in the country because square footage, it was bigger like than Tower Records, it was bigger than Sam Goody's, it was bigger than any record store because they had a betting department downstairs and they cleared that out and they just made it records. So it was literally the bottom floor of this huge store. And I was the manager at like 19 years old. And long story short, I gave a customer a discount because I was allowed to as the manager. This guy bought like $300 worth of classical records. So I gave him a discount. I sold them to him for like $50. And the genius security team at Corvettes was watching me. And they thought I was giving this guy free records, right? They're like, oh, we caught him. So these little like, Joe Fridays come down and they literally put handcuffs on me and walked me through the store. And I took them to court because I was in the union, and we sued them, and I was correct because in the owner's, in the manager's manual, it says you can mark down any product that's over 5 years old, and it was over 5 years old. So I sued him, and I got $10,000, and I took that money, and I bought a head shop in the Packanack Lake little strip mall there on Route 23 in Wayne, and that became Looney Tunes Records, and we ran Looney Tunes into the ground. Now, we ran Looney Tunes from 79 to 82, and that's where Dramarama started, in the basement of Looney Tunes sometime about 1982. And Looney Tunes was great because we had all of our rock and roll heroes there. We used to do in-stores, as they used to call them. So all the guys in the bands we loved, like I loved Mott the Hoople, so we had Ian Hunter, and I loved David Bowie, and we had Mick Ronson, Ian Hunter and Mick Ronson, who were a team back then. We had the Ramones in store. We had the Plasmatics. We had Uncle Floyd. We were the Uncle Floyd Show headquarters. We sold the only place you could buy Uncle Floyd stuff, and people would come from like Connecticut to buy like a Bones Boy T-shirt or some crazy
Oogie.
Uncle Floyd character.
Oogie. Did you have Oogie stuff?
Oogie. Floyd got engaged to his wife on his knee in front of the Ramones section in our store, because that's where he met her. And we had a great connection with the Uncle Floyd show. So, and that's how we got all the cool bands to know about our store, because they all watched Uncle Floyd, like David Johansen from the Dolls and the Ramones. They all knew Looney Tunes because we used to put commercials on the Uncle Floyd show.
So when did you decide to start to get the band together? I mean, and I heard you practice after hours, or...
We started the band in 82. We started making records in 84. We made our first single. And then we sent our stuff to a French label called New Rose Records, who was a really cool label because it had like all the bands we liked from America, like the Cramps and the Replacements and Johnny Thunders and all that kind of stuff. And they signed us, and that was really where our first album came out in France as an import. And then this DJ out in Los Angeles, Rodney Bingenheimer, bought our record because Edie Sedgwick was on the cover and he liked her. And he started playing this one song from the album, Anything, Anything, on his show, Rodney on the Rock, which is like this legendary radio show. And we were still living in Wayne, and we heard Rodney was playing our record. We were freaking out. And then the radio station he was on, the biggest radio station in L.A. at the time, K-Rock, started to play our song, and it became number one, the most requested song on the station. So we said, let's go to California. So we were playing strip bars in Totowa, New Jersey. It wasn't really happening for us. So we went to California, and we sold out the Roxy, and then the next day we were on the radio, and they said, hey, you want to open for the Psychedelic Furs at Irvine Meadows? And we were like, sure, what's that? And then we went and saw Irvine Meadows, and it was this like big, giant stadium place. We were like, wow, let's live here. So we told our parents, hey, we're not coming home because we're on the radio and we're playing at the Irvine Meadows Amphitheater. So we're not coming home till Christmas. So we just stayed out here, and I've been out here ever since.
Now, when you moved out there, you said you'd started on a different label. When did an American label pick you up?
Well, we put out the first record that was on the French label on our own, and then we got picked up for the second album, Box Office Bomb, and we were on a label called Chameleon, and they were through Capitol Records, and we made a couple of records for them, and then we got signed to Elektra, which is really cool because that was really a major label. That was like the first time we actually got to benefit or feel the benefits of what it's like to be on a label where you get a little tour support and you get a tour bus and, you get to make a couple of videos and, it was what we had strived for our whole career. And then, of course, we broke up. So,
Now, what was your experience with videos? Because I talked to a lot of musicians that, we're both at the age where videos were so impactful. I mean, we watched MTV left and right.
Looking back at videos, because I was just talking to somebody about it, looking back now, it's the most ridiculous thing ever. Because what happened was the videos became almost more important than the album. And what really happened that really drove the record business down into a hole was these, 1-year veterans of making videos were charging bands like $100,000, $95,000, $100,000, whatever, to make these videos. So you have a song, and then you're going to go spend, $75,000 on some video, which costs more than the whole album costs to make this video that you hope they're going to play on 120 minutes on Sunday night. And, what happened was the bands all wanted videos. So they would say, oh, make a video. Well, Sophie Miller charges, she just did the Smashing Pumpkins, and if you want her, she drew out a little sketch. I remember I'd be looking at these sketches, these blueprints. And again, these people had been in the business for 15 minutes making videos. And all of a sudden they're charging bands $90,000. So, of course, the bands wanted to do the videos, and they'd be in the hole for all this money. And, while the videos were fun and everything, you owed the record company that money later. So it got to be a little crazy. And, of course, now you can make a video on your phone, and you could make a cool video for probably $10.
Right.
So it's so silly. Because these people were using film. They all thought they were Stanley Kubrick making these 3-minute pop videos, and it was crazy. But it was fun because it was another way for people to see you, and if you were a visual band, if you were good looking, if you were, girls or whatever, you had a certain appeal to a certain audience, it was really good. But again, it was so crazy expensive.
Now, what do you think made you guys hit in the beginning when you did? Because I know you ended up being on playing on Letterman and Dennis Miller and stuff like that.
One sec, I'm so sorry. The phone's just going to keep ringing.
Okay.
Hold on. I'm back. Sorry about that.
Oh, no problem. So what do you think made you guys hit it when you did? Because was it the help of Rodney, or was it just because your sound was different? Because there was a lot of, at the time, it wasn't alternative, as we used to call it, or new wave, was becoming big. But you guys were a little bit harder than that, I think.
Yeah, we had whatever it was just, it was this song in the beginning, anything. And it's like you said, it was a weird time for music because, we were on a channel, K-Rock, that we broke on, which was heavy into Depeche Mode and The Cure and all sorts of things. But they also played, X and the Ramones. So we fit in there somehow. And, yeah, we had a harder edge. We were definitely a guitar band in a world of synthesizers in 1986. And I think that might have been something that stuck out. It was so different, in between whatever they were playing at the time, be it Love and Rockets or The Cure or whatever, Bauhaus, whatever they were playing. It had this just energy to it. And I think, obviously the bass playing was exquisite, so everybody was jumping on that. Just kidding, because I was the bass player. But there was just something about it. And the weirdest thing, Steve, is here we are in 2019, and that song is on the radio 3 or 4 times every day in LA. Still, doesn't matter the year. You care when they played in the morning, they played in the afternoon, they played at night on various stations, not only just K-Rock. It's the weirdest thing in the world for a song that came out in 1986.
Well, I know it's one of my favorite songs. I love that song. And when you tell people, hey, that song by Dramarama, a lot of times they're like, what? And then when you say, listen, they go,
right, they
I love that song.
They don't know the band, yeah.
So
yeah,
what was it?
What happens?
What was it like playing on Letterman?
Letterman was great. I mean, I remember we weren't allowed to talk to Dave. That was one of the things that always sticks out. Don't talk to Dave if he comes down the hall, whatever you do. And I also remember it was freezing cold, which was cool. I guess Dave doesn't like to, sweat or anything. And I also remember I couldn't play the bass because you had to play with Paul and the band. So it was always weird. Like REM would come on or some band would come on and you'd see them playing the bongos or something because the other guys, because they needed to have the house band play with you. So I did play the congas on Haven't Got a Clue, which was the song we played on Dave. I had to be on, I wasn't going to not be on, and they had their band there, so it was so weird, we didn't even use our drummer.
Well, now, one thing that you can tell, you're from New Jersey and the tri-state area, is your band was on the Joe Franklin show. That's
right. Thank you. We were one of the highlights of our career. I have tapes, phone tapes of me calling the Joe Franklin show, trying to get on for 6 months. And the phone calls, I could make an album with just these phone calls on a Jerky Boys level. But we weren't goofing on Joe, we were serious. But the rigmarole that they would put you through, Joe had this crazy assistant that would answer the phone. He was these guys are old school showbiz, 40s, 50s guys, hello? And I'm like, yeah, this is Chris Carter from a band. We're Dramarama. We're called Dramarama. We're from New Jersey, and we love Joe, and we were wondering if we could get on the show. Dramarama, let me write this down. And then you get, call Joe tomorrow at 4. And then I'd write it down. Okay, we'll call Joe tomorrow at 4. And then the next day it's 4 o'clock. Hello? Hey, yeah, this is Chris Carter from the band Dramarama. We called yesterday. You said to call at 4 to talk to Joe. Dramarama. Let me see. Joe is at the doctor's. It was the greatest thing. This went on for hours. We got on the show.
You need to release it on YouTube, because I'm going to tell you, everybody from New Jersey, our age, or from the New York area, loves Joe Franklin. I talked to comics who, their first performance was in Joe Franklin, and it was such
a great show because they'd have a psychic on, a juggler, and Bill Cosby.
Right.
they'd have a great show with these most local random people. It was great, and they play your song, and while you're sitting you're sitting on the chair next to Joe, and they play your song, and then they have it, and you wouldn't do it. You'd just be sitting in the chair, and then the camera would go close up to your face while they're playing your song, and you're just sitting in the chair. You don't know what to do. Oh, okay. You don't sing along. You're not playing. They're just playing your song.
So you're on that show. You're on Letterman. You're on your career's going well. What ended up making you guys disband or break up? You never know. Was it because grunge was coming in, or were you guys just tired of each other?
No, actually, we were happy about that. That was good for us. Grunge was coming in because we were a guitar band. We were happy. We were like, wow, finally, guitars are back. It was just a succession of bummers, as they say. We were on the road. We were doing a tour. It was an okay tour. You know, it's tough out there because when you leave the areas you're big in, L.A., Houston, whatever, and you got to go cut through Nebraska and Tennessee, you know, you're not playing to big places, especially at that point. This is pre-internet, you know. It was like word of mouth, hits magazines, a couple of magazines, and, you know, MTV 120 minutes. That's all you had. And, of course, radio. So it was a little tough. We weren't depressed, but things were going okay. But we were happy because the last show of this tour was going to be at the Hollywood Bowl, and we were going to play with Duran Duran and the Cranberries, and we were in the middle slot. So it was a good slot, and it was a big payday for us. So that was kind of the light at the end of the tunnel. And we had probably a week and a half before the Hollywood Bowl show, and we found out that our record company and Elektra had split, and we were no longer going to be on Elektra Records, and we were very, very depressed. And then the next day, we found out that Simon Le Bon from Duran Duran had laryngitis, and they canceled the Hollywood Bowl show. So now we had no record label and no Hollywood Bowl show within 48 hours, and, you know, we were all wound up young men, and we were all just so frustrated and depressed, because when you love something the way we loved being in the band, and we loved the music, we loved the business and everything, when bad things happen, you know, in succession, you can really react because it's so close to you, you know. And, you know, if we didn't care about the Hollywood Bowl and we didn't care about being on the label, it wouldn't have affected us. But we knew how much of a drag that was. And then we just broke up. I think we came home from the tour, and we were all we had no label. We didn't play the Hollywood Bowl. We were just so bummed out. And, you know, it was a long time ago. I can't really remember all the details, but that's the gist of it.
So you guys break up, and I just said you guys were friends, you know, from back in the New Jersey days. So you really knew each other. And I think when you're in a band with friends, there's a closeness and a bond. So when you break up, what is your mindset? Because all of a sudden, even though you're friends, there's a different, camaraderie because you're not in the band.
Exactly. Because, well, you can compare it to a relationship. Really, it's like a relationship, a personal relationship. But you had a personal relationship with all these different guys, and of course, when you're in any group, the group dynamic is always a couple of guys are thinking one thing, and the other couple of guys are thinking another thing. One guy might be on his own thinking something else. So it's a weird setup. And right after it happens, you don't really talk to each other. Not that you're fighting, but you just don't really, because it's just, what are you going to talk about? You're just bummed out. It's the way Paul was after he left the Beatles. You know, you get depressed because this is something you were doing, for the last, 10 years of your life or more. You're 110% dedicated to it. That's all you've done. And that's the only association people know you with. Oh, it's Chris from Dramarama. Oh, it's John from Dramarama. That's who you are. And now you're not that anymore, and the band's over, and you feel like, you're down. You don't feel like a loser. You just feel depressed no matter what the circumstances, because you've lost. It's like a loss. It's like losing your mate, but you lost all of them. And, we stayed close, and then there was this crazy VH1 Bands Reunited show, which got our band back together for the first time in 10 years, and we actually played a concert. And after that, the singer said, he wanted to still be in drama. He wanted to start Dramarama up again, and I didn't, because I had another career going on. So John and I had a meeting, and I said, yeah, go ahead, be Dramarama, get some more guys, sure. Because he didn't have anything else to do. I had a radio career I started, so that's the way that ended. So we're still very close. Me and John are closer than ever, because we still do business, because we own the song and the first two records together. So they're always using anything on all sorts of crazy TV shows. Like we were just on this sci-fi show. I can't think of the name right now, but they used our song as like the trailer to their show. So
So the band breaks up and you start this other career. How do you start your new career? And were you a DJ first? What got you into that? I mean, and what roads led you to that?
I went to the Connecticut School of Broadcasting, my friend. If you listen to rock and roll radio in the 70s, if you listen to NEW or PLJ, you used to hear the commercials for the Connecticut School of Broadcasting. And I went there because back then, in the 70s, you actually had to have a third-class license before you could get on the radio. You had to take this big test about, megahertz and kilowatts and things. And so I went to the Connecticut School of Broadcasting, which is really cool because it was all these kids, all these, guys and girls from Boston, Connecticut, New York, and they all talk like this. So they would teach these guys who wanted to be sportscasters. They would teach you how to enunciate and sound like you're from the Midwest. You can't have any regional dialect. So Marv Albert was one of our teachers and stuff like that. It was pretty cool, actually, the Connecticut School of Broadcasting. I should call them and tell them that I've hit the big time now.
Yeah.
Maybe they'll put my picture up there in the hallway or something. So I always loved radio, and I was the guy in Dramarama they would send to do the radio interviews as a rule, because I just loved radio. I just liked going to radio stations. Ever since I was like a kid, I always thought that was the coolest thing. More than TV. I just thought radio was always interesting when they would show you Wolfman Jack in American Graffiti, and he's up there in the middle of the night. I always thought that was that's the job for me right there. I want to do that. I want to be Wolfman Jack all by myself playing records in this room, eating popsicles. It's great. So that's what I do now. I eat popsicles.
Yeah.
I'm all alone in a room doing radio.
Now, was your
dream
first
has come true.
Yeah, was your first gig with K-Rock? What was your first actual radio gig?
Well, I filled in for Rodney Bingenheimer a couple of times. Me and John did. When Rodney would go on vacation. So that was cool, and I knew I loved it then. And we would listen back to the shows, and they were fun. They were good. People liked them. And then here in Los Angeles, there was a radio, K-Rock was the big alternative rock and roll station. And sometime at the end of the 90s, a new station started, Y107, and they were going to be the big competition for K-Rock. And I turned them on. They were playing anything. And I said, oh, man, they're going right after K-Rock here. I should call these guys up. They're playing. I should call up and ask them for a job. Yeah. It just sounded like a good idea. So I called up the station while they were playing anything. And I said, hey, it's Chris Carter. I playing on that record you're playing right now. I'd love to have my own show on your new cool station. And the next thing you know, they gave me a Sunday night spot. And I had a show called the Chris Carter Mess. And I did that for 2 or 3 years, I guess. And then my favorite radio show, Breakfast with the Beatles, which was on Sunday mornings in Los Angeles and hosted by Deirdre O'Donoghue, I turned that on one morning and there was no DJ. Deirdre, the host, had not shown up. Long story short, she had passed away. And she didn't come into work. We were just playing Beatles records. And, your first thought is, oh, my God, that's so sad. What happened to Deirdre? And then your second thought is, wow, what's going to happen to Breakfast with the Beatles? What's going to happen to the show? And another long story short, I tried out for the job. They had 5 different DJs, and every Sunday, somebody else would host it. And that went on throughout the summer. And then when it came to September, they had a vote for, who was going to be the fill-in DJ or the new DJ. And I won, and I got that vote. And I've been there for 19 years now doing that show.
Now, when you were doing the audition, do you think it helped that when you were younger, you were such a fan of the English Invasion and you knew the Beatles? I mean, did that help you?
Oh, yeah. I know all the information, in my head, and it's just, and that's what, that's what radio all comes down to, basically, is how you interpret the information you're delivering, you know. So I'm like a walking encyclopedia, and that can be really annoying and overly geeky if you don't present the information in a kind of lighthearted, almost maybe humorous way. Otherwise, you come off like a real know-it-all, and I think that's really annoying for people, you know. Well, Steve, you know that Abbey Road was recorded before, but you know, you sound like a bit off-putting. So I always try to be funny, and at the same time play stuff and tell them things that they've never heard before about the Beatles, and hopefully that combination is likable. And that's the way I kind of approach it, and I still do now, because it's a tricky business, the Beatles, because you're talking to some people who are like me, who know all things, everything. They know every song, when it was recorded, where it was recorded, who's playing what, etc. And at the very same time, you're talking to somebody who might have one Beatles album, you know, the Beatles one. So you're talking to both people at the same time, so you really have to walk a fine line and entertain them both, you know. So it's a little tricky, but after a while, you kind of get it down.
Yeah, well, it's funny because I remember I lived in L.A. I just moved back 2 years ago, and I remember driving and hearing Ivor Davis on your show. And Ivor, he had just been on. Actually, I'm looking at his book right here. He had just been on Cooper Talk like a few months later, and it was cool because that's a guy who knows the Beatles.
Right. Ivor's interesting because he's almost like Zelig if you talk to him. I didn't know all these things about him. Sometimes you have to wonder because, you know, he was in the kitchen when Robert Kennedy was shot. He was with the Beatles when the Beatles went to see Elvis. He was in all these. He was in all the Manson.
Right.
He went to every Manson trial. But then, you know, there was one thing about Ivor. We were like, Ivor, you were in the car with the Beatles when they went to see Elvis? That's right, Chris, I was there. And then we had a guy on, Jerry Schilling, who was there, Elvis's guy, you know, with the red hair, that guy, one of the Elvis Mafia guys.
Right.
And we're like, did the Beatles come with a little British guy named Ivor? And, like, he's like, no, the Beatles just came by themselves. And, you know, so Ivor was there. He tells us he was there, but then he wasn't there. Like, it's a weird thing with Ivor. We have to put a little lie detector thing on Ivor to see if he's 100% telling the truth. Because we had him on. He's on my show this Sunday, as a matter of fact. I tease him. You know, I go, Ivor, you were there with the Beatles. Where were you, outside or inside? Like, well, I was outside. I didn't go in. Oh, okay. You were outside.
Now,
just checking.
Now you interviewed all the Beatles except John. What was it like interviewing Pete Best as an interviewer, as a Beatle fan, and talking to a guy who missed out on the biggest career? His life would have changed 8,000 times. How do you go about interviewing someone like that?
Well, Pete's easy, and a matter of fact, it's interesting you bring that up. That was the first interview I think we had on Breakfast With. I think he might have been the first guest I ever had. Pete's interesting because he's very into talking about anything about the Beatles. He doesn't mince words. He doesn't hold back. And the most fascinating thing to this day that I recall from that interview that stayed with me is when I asked him if he had ever spoken to any of the Beatles since the day, you know, in 1961 that, you know, they let you go. And he has never spoken to any of the Beatles. And I found that to be fascinating, that there was never a night, you know, in the 1980s where Paul was smoking a joint and he said, let's call Pete Best. You know, just one of the Beatles might want to give him a ring, you know, just after all these years, you know, but they've never spoken to him. And even when someone from the inner circle of the Beatles passes away, like a Neil Aspinall or somebody like that, and there's a funeral or a wake, Paul and Ringo always go separately. And, you know, like when Neil Aspinall was there, Pete Best was there. But Paul and Ringo knew. He didn't go. They did a separate thing. They don't want to run into him still, which is such a weird thing if you think about it.
Now, being a Beatle expert, and you host the show, what's your insights to each of the interviews you did with Paul, George, and Ringo?
Well, you know, they're all different. You have to kind of know how to approach them to get the best out of them. For instance, Ringo, I always lead with, Ringo, you look fantastic. You look so good. What did you eat today? He loves that. Oh, broccoli and blueberries, Chris. Thank you. Like, he just, you know, you don't want to ask Ringo Beatle questions necessarily. He doesn't, you know, there's certain things you kind of learn over the years, what they like and what they don't like, you know. You never want to ask Ringo, hey, Ringo, did you hear Paul's new album? I don't know. Did you hear Paul's new album? You know, he doesn't want to talk. He wants to talk about his stuff, what he's doing. So then that's what you do with Ringo. Paul, on the other hand, will talk about anything. Paul called the same number you called me at on his birthday, and we did like 25 minutes on his birthday. And, you know, you can ask Paul literally anything, you know. The only problem is you don't want to ask him a lot of Beatle questions because they don't remember. They don't get it right, even though they're the Beatles. You say, Paul, did you, he has a new song called Frank Sinatra's Party, right? It's a bonus track on his Egypt Station album. So I'm like, that was a new thing, so I brought it up. Paul, that new song you wrote, Frank Sinatra's Party, it's great. Tell me about that. He's like, oh, you know, we were just jamming, and I started saying Frank Sinatra's Party, and then I started naming all the guests, and I was like, wow, do you remember, I said, in 1968, Frank Sinatra did a song, a parody of The Lady is a Champ, and The Lady is a Tramp, and he called it The Lady is a Champ, and it was about Ringo's wife. What happened was, Ringo's wife, Maureen, was a big Frank Sinatra fan, so for her birthday, Sinatra recorded a song for her, and in the song, he sings about the Beatles. You married Ringo, it could have been Paul, all these great lyrics. So I bring up to Paul, you remember Frank Sinatra did that song? He didn't even know what I was talking about. And this song is legendary in Beatles fandom because they made an acetate of it, and it was Apple Records #1. It was the Frank Sinatra song to Maureen was Apple I. And Mary Hopkins, Those Were the Days, was Apple II as a result of that. So every Beatle geek knows this story. But Paul had no clue what I was talking about. So I'm literally playing it to him over the phone. I go, listen, Frank Sinatra says Paul right here. He's like, wait, Frank Sinatra mentions me? I'm like, yeah, listen, we've been listening to this song for, 50 years. He never heard it. And I had to, he said, send me that. So I was like, okay. So there's just a glimmer of, things we think they know. They don't know because they're too busy being the Beatles at the time.
Now, what was George like?
George is like the funniest guy. Everything is humor. I did the All Things Must Pass interview that came out on a CD, which was my favorite album pretty much of all time. So it was a great honor to do that. And that was at a point where he had been diagnosed with cancer and then he beat it. And there was this in-between point where he was actually going around and doing interviews. He came to Capitol, which is where that interview was. And then, I think maybe a month and a half later, he was re-diagnosed with it, and then it came back. So that may have been one of the last interviews ever. George is just a funny guy who, is probably the least into being a Beatle, post-Beatles, the other guys seem to want to talk about it more. Will talk about it more. He doesn't look at it with the same, love maybe as Paul and Ringo. Paul definitely loves, he'll talk for hours about the Beatles, where George would rather not, I think. You could see that in the anthology, documentary. George is always a bit, he's laid back. He's a funny guy, he's just, that's the way he is. And that's why he's my favorite Beatle.
Well, now, with Breakfast and the Beatles, at one point you made a switch in stations, right? Like in the middle of 2000s?
Yeah. The station we were the station had been switching over the years. It started on a really legendary station here called KMET. And then we went to another station and it flipped and turned to a talk station. That was where I was with, I was the only music station, only music show on the station. We had Howard Stern in the morning, and then we were like all talking. Sunday mornings I'd play the Beatles. And then I went over to KLOS, which is the classic rock station of Los Angeles. We've been broadcasting since 1969, so our 50-year anniversary. So that's the station I'm on now, on terrestrial radio, and then I'm on the Beatles channel Monday through Friday mornings every day. So
now, how do you get your ideas for the shows you're going to play? Because as you said, you've been doing the show for a long time. There's so many. It's funny when you talk about the Beatles. They didn't release nearly as many albums as most people think.
Right. Especially if you just look at the British releases, which is what they really intended you to hear. The Capitol Records was so crazy. They would just put random songs, from the last two albums all together on one album. And the Beatles would come to America and they wouldn't know what songs were on those albums. They'd go, this is from Beatles 9, because they didn't know. They didn't even know what was on these albums. So yeah, the way I keep it fresh, it's pretty easy. I look at everything in a daily, I look at it whatever the day is. So if it's, for instance, August 20th, was yesterday. What happened? Oh, well, it was the last time all four Beatles were together at EMI Studios, right, 50 years ago. So then that's a set of music, okay? They were there to mix I Want You, She's So Heavy. So then I do that. I see what else is happening. Who's born? Oh, the girl in the Bangles was born today. Bangles were on the show once, and they did this great cover of Yes It Is, Happy Birthday, Debbie Peterson. So it's like, what's happening on that day? What's happening in this, whatever it is. If it's the first day of summer, if it's whatever. I can build sets around this stuff, and it's just the way to keep it fresh. For songs people have heard, 1,000 times, you want to put a song into some perspective. Here's Old Brown Shoe. Now, George is playing the bass on this song. Paul's playing a tack piano. You just say that. It creates a little image for someone before they hear Old Brown Shoe. You tell them it's the flip side of the Ballad of John and Yoko. You tell them it was recorded right before the guy started doing the Abbey Road album. That's enough, 30, 40 seconds, a little bit of information, move on. And that keeps it interesting, and it makes that song, it puts it in some perspective for somebody instead of just playing the song and hearing it for the umpteenth time with no perspective,
Now,
that's kind of what we do.
Now, do you run into a lot of, Beatles super fans who want to challenge you on your knowledge of the Beatles? Does this ever happen to you?
Sometimes, rarely, because maybe more in the beginning, though it didn't really happen, but you can kind of tell. But I think over 20 years now, people learn to not mess with me because I will take them down if they want to start. People are a little weird sometimes. Like, I'll give you an example. If you go to Wikipedia and you put She Said by the Beatles, you type it in, right? And then you look at personnel. It says George Harrison, bass. And I argue with people all the time that say this is because they read it on Wikipedia or they read it in some book. And I say, that's not George on bass on She Said, that's Paul. And they'll say, no, I read that. And then I'll say, this is where it gets fun. I'll say, okay, well, let's go back to the recording of that. You know what day it was recorded? And they'll go, well, I don't know what day it was recorded. Well, it was June 21st, 1966. It was the last song the boys were working on for the Revolver album. Paul came in, they did 3 takes, and the story is Paul got into a fight with the other 3 Beatles the day they did She Said, and then he left the studio. And that's what Paul remembers. And in a book by Barry Miles, Paul actually says, She Said might be the one Beatles song I'm not on. So that's where they all get this from. But, like I said earlier, Paul can be wrong sometimes. And in this case, he's wrong. Because there were no bass overdubs on She Said. The boys played it 3 times, as a run-through, 2 guitars, bass, and drums, and that was it. And then Paul got into a fight and left. So then, that's where, like you said, where someone might want to argue with me or somebody will send me a letter and say, Paul, or Paul doesn't play bass on She Said. And then I'll start, a little dialogue. But that very rarely happens. Very rare.
Now, you're on Sirius, as you said. Was your introduction, was that through, I know Little Steven, you started with his station. Was that your introduction through to Sirius? Did that get you started with them?
Little Steven Van Zandt, my hero and savior. Without Steven, I would have nothing. I owe everything to Steven Van Zandt because he was a fan of Breakfast with the Beatles, and he would come on the show, and he said, you gotta bring your show over to the Underground Garage, and I did, and that's where Breakfast with the Beatles was for a few years, and then there was this big lawsuit between Sirius XM and the guys from the Turtles, and there was all this, I don't know if you remember, there was this lawsuit about records pre-72 and post-72 and how they get paid for royalties and copyrights, and as a result of that lawsuit, we couldn't do any specialty shows revolving around 60s artists, so that's where it changed from me doing Breakfast with the Beatles in the Underground Garage to Chris Carter's British Invasion, which was a show that Steven kind of invented for me so I could stay on the station. And that's really one of my most favorite things to do, because not only do I get to play, the Beatles and the Stones and the Kinks and the Who and the Small Faces and all that British Invasion stuff, I get to play all that stuff I told you earlier that I love so much, like all the, glam bands from the 70s, so I can mix up, the Small Faces and the Who with David Bowie and T-Rex, and then I can play like Blur and Oasis and Britpop stuff, and it's just all British, all British rock and roll, which is, I'm in heaven, so. And then I even have a segment called Americans, who deep down wish they were British, and that way I can play any Americans who sound like the Beatles, like the Raspberries or any of that kind of stuff.
Now, when I was in L.A., I lived there for a long time. I used to, on Sundays, if I was in the car, I would listen to you, and you would be live from the Kobe Steakhouse. And I always stopped there and said, all I could think was a bunch of people eating steak and eggs and drinking mimosas. What was it like recording there?
That's exactly it. You've got it. We're still there, man, and now we've added the Morongo Casino Resort and Spa to my live performances. So twice a month we're live. The Kobe Steakhouse is like the Cavern Club, only like it's classy. It's like a classy Cavern Club with better food. It's really dark with low ceilings, and I can't explain it, but, I think for like 7 years now, we've been sold out every time we've ever been there. There's a line when I pull up in the morning, and these people just come in and have the greatest time because they can eat endless amounts of food, drink endless amounts of mimosas or the drinks of their choice. Watch me do the show. We interact with the crowd. They all leave with some sort of prize or something. It's just fun. It's just a lot of fun. It's become a thing, People wait for 3 or 4 months to go. The waiting list. It's like, they'll tell me, oh, yeah, we're sold out till December. I'm like, you're kidding. I can't even believe it. But it's great. I love it. It's fun. It's tough for me. I got to show up and, be on a Sunday morning, right, dressed and showered, and, people are staring at me for 3 hours. Isn't my favorite thing, but I've gotten used to it. I love just doing radio, rolling out of bed and going to the station and doing it. But this is, you got to pretty yourself up because you're going to take pictures with all these, Beatle fans, which is great. I love them. But,
now you've been DJing and you've been a musician, but you also produced a movie. I believe you're a producer, or you're involved in the movie.
I wrote it, produced it, did everything. It was my movie from the get-go. I never made a movie ever before, and it was true adventure. It was about Rodney Bingenheimer, the guy who broke Dramarama, and about a million other bands. And for whatever reason, Rodney had taken a liking to me. When we moved here, I was his go-to guy in Dramarama. And, Rodney would call me 3 times a day, 365 days a year. It was just like K-Rock playing anything. Rodney would call my house in the morning. We became really close friends. And I was fascinated by his, Forrest Gump-like Zelig lifestyle, because here was this guy who had basically never finished high school and was just this little boy from, Mountain View, California, who loved rock and roll, and his mom dropped him off in Hollywood when he was 16 years old. It was, kind of a weird story, and he ended up, hanging out and becoming what was called the mayor of the Sunset Strip. And, you call whoever you see on the street all the time the mayor of whatever town you live in, because that guy's always hanging around. And there was Rodney. He was, if any rock band showed up, whether it was the Stones or whomever from England, David Bowie, they would meet Rodney, because Rodney was there. He was just there hanging out. And I just thought it was such a fascinating story. And he's very eccentric. He eats at the same place at the same time every day. It doesn't matter, if it's Christmas, Thanksgiving, New Year's Eve, a snowstorm, a blackout. He'll still be at Cantor's at 11 o'clock eating the same meal. Doesn't matter. And it's quite a story. And I knew I could get all these amazing pop culture people in the movie. And all I had to do was find a director. So I found this guy, George Hickenlooper, and he was one of my favorites. The making of Apocalypse Now. It was called Hearts of Darkness.
Right.
The making of Apocalypse Now. And that was almost better than the real movie, because it was showing you, Martin Sheen has a nervous breakdown. It's crazy, that movie. It's insane. And I loved it. And I was like, I want to get a guy who's not a rock and roll guy to make the movie. I wanted someone else's perspective. I didn't want a rock guy like me. I wanted someone who could look at his whole life differently. So he was a perfect fit. So I never made a movie, and I found this guy, and he agreed to do it. So it was just the two of us. We had no money. And from there, it took 7 years. And we made this movie, and we got David Bowie in it. We got Cher in it. We have Courtney Love. We have the Ramones. We have Oasis, Alice Cooper. You name it, they're in that movie. And in the course of the movie, Rodney's mom passes away, and all these things happen. And it became a really, really nice film. And we sold it for 7 figures. And at the time, we sold that it was the second highest selling documentary. Bowling for Columbine was the first at the time, in 2004. So it was a success. We sold it, and we won awards, and we were nominated for an Independent Spirit Award, and we won the Santa Barbara Film Festival, and we're in the London Film Festival. My mom and dad saw it at Lincoln Center in New York City. It was a new experience for me, but
now,
it was a lot of fun.
In that movie, there's a scene where Rodney's all pissed off at you. Explain what happened
yelling
there.
at me in my own movie. I know. I know. Well, I'll be honest with you. He was yelling at me for something else, and George Hickenlooper was filming it, and the way he edited it into the movie, it seems like he's yelling at me because I got my own radio show against his, which was true. But, I loved radio. You know what I mean? I wasn't going to not get a radio show just because Rodney has a radio show. That's why I liked Rodney in the first place, because I loved radio. But I did get the show. Remember I told you it was a station competing with K-Rock. And I was literally on against Rodney on Sunday nights. And, that's the way it goes.
Now, your Breakfast with the Beatles airs on which station now?
We're on KLOS, and of course now these days, with iHeartRadio, we're on everywhere. But we're on KLOS in Los Angeles here on FM radio. We're on Beatles Channel Monday through Friday mornings on Sirius XM, and Chris Carter's British Invasion is in Little Steven's Underground Garage on both Saturday and Sunday. So I'm literally doing 8 shows a week.
Okay. Well, I got a question for you. I saw a posting on Facebook, and I had friends from L.A. Did K-Rock change or something? Some station just changed? Because people were saying one of the stations just changed their format.
Yeah, well, 103.1 changed format, but not, that was like 7-8 months ago. They were the other rock station that competed with KLOS. They flipped, and they went Christian. K-Rock is still the same, unless something happened I didn't know about. Is this like a recent thing you saw, Steve?
I just saw a post today. Someone said, and someone else was like, yeah, my buddy's like, we used to listen to this band and this band. And I knew I was talking to you, so I wanted to find out, because I know that the...
you know what? I haven't seen anything today, though that doesn't mean it didn't happen. I don't know. I'm a little out of the loop so far today.
One final
I hope
question.
it wasn't KLOS.
No, it wasn't KLOS. One final question. I got one final question for you. As someone who's gone from a musician in that time where the videos were very important and people bought albums, I believe you designed some of the album covers for Dramarama.
Sure.
And so, from someone who's going through something that's so driven by album like we were, and who's someone's in radio where you're driven by Beatles fans with your albums, how have you seen the music culture and radio culture change since your start?
Well, like you say, everything was kind of rooted in albums back then. Albums were really important. And now, as, music has changed and people aren't necessarily buying full albums or compact discs or any format that contains a lot of songs, it seems the way the music business is now driven is everything is like song orientated. One song. Even if Paul McCartney's got a new album coming out, he releases one song first, then he releases a second song, then he releases a third song, then the album, or something like that. And the reason they do that is because I think in today's culture and society, and again, the formats have changed where people aren't buying CDs. Really, what do you do? If you made an album now, Steve, what would you do? When I say an album, a collection of songs, what would you do with it?
Right.
Would you make a CD? They don't even make CDs half the time. Would you make vinyl that people are, 13% of the population are buying and half of them don't open them? So where do you put your music? So the theory is, well, we'd be better off putting out one song first. So everybody can, it's kind of the old singles strategy, but people are releasing a song, like if, some like Neil Young or somebody, some classic artist, they have a new album coming out, they'll put that song out first. Buy the song, 99 cents, $1.25, whatever it is, because that's how you get people's attention. You put 14 songs out now, people, they don't know what to do. They don't know which song. Number 4, do I like number 11? Do we play number 9? You have to, tell them what to do. And then again, the real irony is all these great bands who are the classic bands of rock, pick it, Aerosmith, whoever you want. If they make a new album, who plays it? It's so weird. Tom Petty makes a new song, before he passes away. Who plays it? KLS doesn't play it. They'll play, his old songs, but they don't play the new songs. Bob Seger makes a new album. Who plays it? It's so weird, to be an artist in 2019, especially an older rock and roll artist, because everything is kind of not rock and roll anymore, if you noticed. I mean, how many rock records are in the Billboard Hot 100 right now?
Right.
5.
I know, it's changed so much. So anyway, hey man, I want to thank...
It's a different business now,
I want to thank you for taking the time today. Now, can people follow you on social media? How can people get the information that you said earlier?
We got a Facebook page, and we have our website, breakfastwiththebeatles.com. We've got a new store, Steve, where we're selling great swag. We've got Breakfast with the Beatles cereal bowls and shot glasses and keychains and T-shirts and robes. It's a scene over there, so visit that.
I'm going to tell, I have my bachelor party tonight, but I'm over 50, so we're just going out for something to eat. But my buddy...
Oh, congratulations.
Thanks. My buddy Carrie Steuben's picking me up, and he's a huge Beatles fan, so I'm going to send him to your store, and he'll buy something. So anyway, people, check out Chris Carter, people. Go to my website, coopertalk.net. I have over 745 episodes up. You can find Cooper Talk on iTunes, which listen to iTunes and do a review. I wasn't on there for a long time. You can go Spotify, TuneIn, Stitcher, all that stuff. Also, follow me on Twitter at Cooper Talk. Email me, Cooper, at coopertalk.net. Remember, I'm Steve Cooper. I'm only as hip as my guests. Don't forget, drink your water, eat your vegetables, take your vitamins, and I'll talk to you next time.